Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. In yesterday's video, we covered the situation of front lines in Ukraine. You should definitely check out that video. It's very nice. But today we're going to be covering about what's going to be happening in a near future. We're going to talk about if Russia can attack, will it attack, and we're going to debunk a couple of ridiculous stories about what Russia can do in Ukraine. Let's dig in, and we start with something that I've mentioned yesterday. Yesterday, I very closely explained about this triangle over here and that it's crucial for Ukraine to hold this and that it's very relevant for Russians also to take it. So this is a contested area. And just to kind of underline my point, just recently over the weekend, there was a big mechanized attack that Russians made on these directions. They attacked from directions of Tonyenke, and it was actually captured on video. And as you can imagine, if it was captured on video, it was a complete disaster, a wipeout. Here we can see these columns approaching from Tonyenke directions. This is like just a shot from video. I cannot show the video, but you can go into the Discord to definitely see all of the action. But Russia has used over 36 tanks in this attack and 12 BMPs. And over 12 tanks and 8 BMPs were destroyed during this attack. Beyond that, there was a complete wipeout additionally in other days, and it's just shown that while Russians are trying to do these attacks, they are not succeeding. What the analysts have talked about, why would Russia do the attacks? Potentially it flows in their new kind of doctrine on how they would conduct the attacks. We've seen something similar with Avdiivka situation, where in first couple of weeks we saw massive armored attacks with a lot of tanks, a lot of BMPs, and they would allow for initial penetration of the front line. And after that, then would come the more manpower based, like small groups assaults to kind of clear out the direction and exploit the weak points. Potentially this is something that Russia wants to achieve again. However, what we've seen so far is that as soon as they try to advance, they have suffered severe casualties and retreated. Now, this column that attacked Tonyenke was not actually something unknown. This column was well before spotted in moving around the back lines of Russians around this area of the Baltseve. And the question was, why I also didn't report, whether this will go towards Bakhmut or it will go towards Avdiivka. Now we know the answer. They went towards Avdiivka, so that one is covered. And another attack that happened during the weekend, just to kind of underline this, is there was attack from Novoprokopovka towards Robotina, where it's like the Russians tried to go into this direction. But again, I cannot show video, but they were again destroyed. So just kind of two small things to keep in mind before we get into the actual discussions. And this is specifically where we go into this discussion about the bullshit articles that we've heard. First, complete BS article is describing the potential Russian attack on Kiev. They are talking that if this has specifically been talked about in a sense of, oh, if Ukraine is not being supported by allies, then already soon there might Russians be in the gates of Kiev. So the problem with this statement is that Kiev right now has been refortified many, many times. Now, I've talked about this a lot, but for Russians to attack to Kiev, they will still struggle with the same two problems. There are, in general, two approaches that can be kind of derived from Kiev. Approach number one is going through Chernobyl zone towards Kiev, and this is where the big column was. This is where initially Russian attack. This is the fastest route. The problem of this fastest route, that it's firstly it goes through Belarus, which is located over here, and secondly it's takes the narrow roads with the forested roads where Russians cannot really spread out, and they will have exactly the same problem that they have in initial offense. So if we're talking about logistics and even like preparation for this push, despite the Ukrainians being prepared here and having the fortifications, then the problem here is that this is a no-go, right? This is just a dead end. And if Russians even would consider taking this again, then this would be even like a non-starter. So, okay, let's talk about the other side. And then the other side is the problem. So, if Russia wants to go to Kiev from this direction or this direction, there's like two big highways. Firstly, this is exactly the direction that Russia already took last time. And secondly, last time they were able to advance because Ukraine didn't really resist. So the problems of Russians start arising because there is a big logistical hub of Chernihiv over here, and there is a big logistical hub of Sumy over here. So both of these directions are not very good for Russians, especially if we remember something like Sumy, because the partisan warfare in Sumy was enormously hard. It would cause enormous damage for Russians. Now you might say, yeah, but Russia can take their time. Well, then it's going to be just another slog. Again, these regions have been fortified. It's not that nothing has been done. If Russia would want to start advancing in these directions, they would not need to advance one of Avdiivka in this direction. They would need to suddenly, in like a short term of like half a year, they would suddenly need to do maybe about 100 of these Avdiivkas like combined to try to, and this is important, reach Kiev. We're not even talking about encircling the city, because once you reach Kiev, you get in the situation that Kiev is a huge nightmare to be sieged. Kiev has a major river. It's a big urban area. And getting to another shore is, again, it's pretty impossible. This is not early days of war. There's not going to be an easy ride towards it. So, all in all, in best case scenario, and this is not even a scenario for me, but in a best case scenario, Russia maybe can get to the left bank of Kiev. There is little to no chance unless Russia mobilizes, and I'm not joking, like 5-6 million people and arms them. They will be able to even reach Kiev. That is the actual truth about Kiev. So Kiev should not even be considered. Whoever says Kiev is considered is either trying to play for media or absolutely doesn't understand the situation. I took specifically long for this just so we are clear. While Ukraine is struggling with ammunition, while Ukraine is struggling for a lot of resources to go on the offensive, defensive-wise, Kiev is strong. Remember, there are certain geographical benefits to this area, specifically because it's heavily forested, it's great for partisan activity, it's great for trap setting, and so on. It's a nightmare to fight in that area. Second BS story that's being discussed is about Kharkiv. Now, Kharkiv has been in the eyes of Russians for a while. This story specifically kind of comes from more pro-Russian sources, where they claim that they're going to mobilize people right now in Russia, and they're going to mobilize like 300,000. Some sources say 500,000, so let's take the higher plank here. So they're going to mobilize 500,000 people, and then they're going to use these 500,000 people to go to Kharkiv to basically take over the city and whatever. 500,000 people. That does sound a lot, right? Well, the truth is it's not really. Kharkiv by itself is about 1.4 million people city. It's a huge city. One cannot take a city of that size. Remember, Avdiivka, that Russia struggled and basically sustained damages, sustained casualties to about, like, I don't know, what was it, like 40,000 people that they sustained damages around Avdiivka. It was a city of 70,000. If we kind of apply the same logic, then just in casualties, Russia would need to take Kharkiv, like, if you want to do like simple, like dirty math here. So if we say, okay, Avdiivka was 70,000, therefore Russians sustained casualties of 40,000. So if we say if it's a 700,000 city, then they would sustain 400,000 casualties. So if the city is 1.4 million, like Kharkiv is, they would need to sustain 800,000 casualties only. And if we're talking casualties, then one casualty is about 1 to maybe 3, 4 people. So even simplest of maths is telling us that for Russia to take this city would require the amount of casualties at the way that they're waging this war right now that Russia just does not have. It's more than their whole force right now in Ukraine. Beyond that, Avdiivka is relatively small settlement. Avdiivka is something where Russians are able to essentially conduct this burn ground tactic. So they're able to turn everything before them into mush and advance that way. Kharkiv is a huge urbanized area. Russia have not fought in this war in huge urbanized area. The closest that they've got was the Battle of Bakhmut. And again, Bakhmut is relatively small city. It's not even close. So the time that it would take for Russians to try to take Kharkiv, it would be enormous. And I'm going to quote General Syrskyi, sir, here. If Russia indeed goes towards Kharkiv, it will be the absolute biggest mistake of this war. It will end Russia. Now, we talked about this before, that this is maybe they will do something else. Maybe they will go around Kharkiv. That's not easy. Like, it's going to be the same as I will explain around Sinkivka. When there is a big logistics hub, when that logistics hub is operational and supplied with resources, which Kharkiv is, then anything just moving around it is pretty impossible. And in the same way for Ukraine with the same. So let's put these to rest. I hope I explained a lot. Like, Russia just does not have the resources. I know it sounds weird, right? Because whenever we think Russia, especially if shills are starting talking about the Russia, not these shills, I mean Russian shills, then they always say, oh, Russia has infinite resources, therefore they can take whatever they want. No, they can't. They don't have infinite resources. They have resources at the way that they're currently fighting for about 1 to 2 years right now. If they will go into Kharkiv and they start intensifying the conflict, that 1 to 2 years, specifically if we're talking about Kharkiv, cuts in about half a year to a year maximum. I would say let's take a year. Let's take longer one. So they don't have the resources. Russia is huge. The resources that they're operating on are enormous, but they're not infinite. So when we talk down to this, where Russia can attack then? Like, where is the logical things? And this is where mostly people agree. So the first direction that definitely Russia wants is Vuhledar. And I talked about this last time, so I'm going to quickly recap that the biggest threat of losing Avdiivka was the cascade effect, that after losing Avdiivka, they can kind of attack from the north and check out and take out supply lines that Ukrainians having, therefore clearing up this objective and taking about this area. And the problem with that is that this is very predictable, and Ukrainians, again, know this. But the unfortunate truth is that without sufficient resources, Ukraine has the ability to fight against Russians, to still sustain efficient casualty ratio against Russians, to attrit Russians, but they don't have the resources to fully stop Russians. Now, there are right now rumors about potentially Ukraine getting additional supplies, but we're going to talk about this in the next videos. There's plenty of things to talk about. But if the situation persists as with Ukraine, this is specifically the number one scenario that I would put for potential of what's going to happen. Scenario number two, where Russia can attack and probably will attack, is that right now they are bogged down in the villages of Bogdanivka and Ivanivsky. But once these villages are kind of overcome, then the situation on the south here becomes very problematic for Ukrainians. So I would expect potentially Russians, if they want to advance in this direction, then they will try to do something like this, and they will try to essentially semi-encircle Chasiv Yar. It's a big fortress for Ukrainians. That's why Russians will try to kind of semi-encircle it and essentially cut it off like this. This would be the plans of Russians if they will go for Bakhmut direction. And then finally, in the south, I feel that the Russians, while it's really hard for Russians to take Robotyne, they also know that this is a significant fortifications. So in case they will take it, they will again have an upper hand in case of Ukrainians doing anything if they want to attack back. Therefore, I believe that there might be an interest for Russians to retake Robotyne, and therefore we might see some attacks here. Additionally, there are discussions about Russia potentially retaking Kupiansk, and this has been discussed a lot by the analysts, and so far I have not seen Russia dedicate a serious force in there. Like, don't get me wrong, the fighting here has been incredibly hard. The Ukrainians have suffered a lot in this area. But I don't see Russians specifically dedicating in this area. And while this is being discussed as a potential for attack, I still believe that Russia wants to get the Donbass area first. And this is kind of what they want to get. And the problem with that is they, again, don't have the forces. If Russia ever gets to Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, it's going to be a complete nightmare for them. It's a huge agglomeration. It's a huge urban area. And if our current estimates for anything that Russia has is to judge, then they will just break themselves against it. They will not be able to take it. The advances that they have around Avdiivka are minuscule. If I just zoom out the map and like we'll look at Ukraine as a whole, this is what they achieved, Russians. This is what they advanced, like this small red dot, if you see it. This is what they achieved in half a year, losing tens of thousands of soldiers. It's a joke. They cannot take Ukraine, even with the current levels of supplies. The only way that they can kind of preserve this in Ukraine is essentially if there is a broken political will in the Western world, which I don't see happening. There is a growing support for Ukraine in European states. I do believe that Donald Trump will alienate all of the supporters that he has, alienate everyone that is in a relatively normal, let's put it like this, Republicans, and eventually he will lose elections, and around next year will come back to normality. I don't see the winning plan here for Russians. They are stuck. Ukraine has already turned into essentially a Vietnam scenario for Russia. This is absolute nightmare. So the Putin right now is back to hoping that the support for Ukraine will fade, and I am certain that it won't, especially not from the European allies. And a couple of words about the mobilization in Russia. So from the 1st of April, in Russian military, they start conscripting the youth. So they start conscripting new people. It is estimated by the Russian authorities that it will conscript about 150,000 people. So because it's the same apparatus that would be needed for mobilization, we are clearly right now should be aware that Russia cannot start a mobilization at least for the next 2-3 months because they're going to be preoccupied with the conscription apparatus. Therefore, all of this big mobilization that everyone is expecting, I don't expect it to start just because Russian apparatus is going to be already busy. Hope this helps explaining you where should we expect, what's going to be expectations for the future, because these are, I expect, going to be happening in the summer season for Russia, one of the directions, maybe two. I love you all, guys. Slava Ukraini, trust in the armed forces of Ukraine, fuck Putin, and I'll see you guys next time.